And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. And joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. Steelers just wrapped up mandatory minicamp. We're not going to talk about that too much, Shayne, because you and I weren't behind the scenes there. And so we're going to touch on some other things today happening. One of the biggest things in the news is the Steelers will be joining the AFC North on Hard Knocks for the first time we've ever seen that division there. A little bit later in the show, we're going to do a deeper dive into Justin Fields and some of the questionable comments coming out from him after the offseason programs here. And we're also going to talk about Najee Harris later in the show as well, and maybe what his future might mean with the Steelers. Obviously, Omar Khan spoke on him recently. We want to break down kind of what he said and where that could be heading in terms of where Najee will be in 2025. So let's start, though, Shayne, with the Hard Knocks news. The Steelers have avoided this since 2001.
Yeah.
So we're going like a 2-decade stretch. Never had to do Hard Knocks, dating back to the Bill Cowher era.
Yeah.
And now they finally were unable to avoid it this time. The Steelers will join the Bengals, Ravens, and Browns as the first full division to be featured on Hard Knocks. The first episode will air on December 3rd. Shayne, what do you make of all of this?
I think it's really interesting that they're doing an in-season version of the show now, where, in the past, it's always been about, like, what does an off-season look like for an NFL team? What does one team do? And, kind of taking that route and going through their off-season. Now we get to see how things kind of progress during an NFL season. I think it's very different, obviously, from what we've seen in the past. And more importantly, like, what does it look like for each team? What are the differences between these teams? Because obviously they're all in the same division, what many people would consider to be the best division in football, myself included. And I think that's a big reason probably why that they were included in this and why they wanted to kick it off with them. The Steelers have avoided it for a reason, right? It is a bit of a distraction, I think, in general. I think good teams have been able to avoid it in the past, and whenever they do have to be on it, you get around it, you figure it out. It's a fun watch, of course, and it's really interesting to see behind the curtain a little bit. In this case, we're going to get to see behind the still curtain a little bit. But in general, it's very interesting that they're taking this route, and going to the whole division should make it very interesting to see how the teams are different, like I said, from each other.
Yeah, and Shayne, super duper honesty time. I've never seen a full season of Hard Knocks before. Like, I've seen episodes, I've seen clips, but I will have to sit down and watch all this.
Yeah, a couple full seasons I've seen in the past. I remember specifically, I think it was one of the late 2000s Jets teams, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. I think I watched all of, I think it was Rex Ryan Jets team. Like, that was very interesting, stuff like that. But it's definitely a lot to go through if you want to watch kind of all of it. It's some episodes are hit or miss, I would say.
Yeah, well, I think it goes without saying that you and I will be tuning in this December.
We will be
of course, it's right in the busiest part of the season. And so, and Shayne, I have a hard time believing now. Tell me if I'm wrong here.
Okay.
Is the NFL dirty for doing this? Like, did they purposely put all of these AFC North games on the back half of the schedule? I mean, the Steelers only play, they don't play anything but AFC North teams plus the Eagles and Chiefs from week 11 until week 18. They knew this was coming, right? Like, that's not a coincidence that they're getting all these games at once. And so the Steelers get by far the toughest stretch of schedule of any team in the league, statistically, from week 18 to week 11 to week 18 to close out the season. Is it Hard Knocks related?
I wonder if that's part of the process for the season, is like why they did that. I do think that it may just be still more in general, like something they're trying out because they want to see if this hurts the product anyway, if this hurts teams, or if it's more of just like, wow, every game matters so much, everybody has to watch it at the end of the year. Because admittedly, like, there's a lot of times, and I'm kind of guilty of this myself for other teams that I watch, not the Steelers, but other teams. Once we're kind of in that back half of the year, and I kind of know the team isn't really going anywhere, I'm like, do I want to watch a Browns, Ravens game, a couple years ago, whenever it really didn't matter that much? Like, not really. Now with all the division games all at the end, like division races are going to come down to the wire because they haven't played them yet. Like the tiebreakers and like so much is happening. I think that's still the biggest reason for doing that. And because I know the Bears are kind of in the same boat and other teams are similar, because obviously if we're playing our division games, a lot of the other teams are too. But I do think it's probably part of it. It's at least probably part of why the AFC North is the division that's getting featured first in this situation. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence. Is it the first time that the Steelers have waited forever this long to play a division rival.
Right, yeah.
And it just so happens that's when they're going to start airing them is right around that time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, take it for what you will. And they've gone so far the other way, Shayne. Like, I've been critical of trying to avoid like the critical AFC North matchups in week 1 of the season. I don't like playing those pivotal games in week 1 because it's so fluky and you're trying to get things figured out. But they've gone so far the other way now, and every game is going to be late in the season. So you hope, obviously, that there's something to play for in all those matchups. You hope that one team isn't out of the race and it makes it less exciting.
Right.
But then again, it's like, this is really, really tough. And so we talked about this before when the schedule came out. The Steelers have to be like 6-2 probably in their first 8 games to give themselves a fighting shot there.
If you want to go,
so yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But Hard Knocks in the AFC North coming this year on HBO. So if you don't have an HBO subscription, you're going to have to get one.
Probably
if you're going to watch this.
If you want to watch this.
So it should be interesting. Shayne, is there any players or coaches in particular you're interested in seeing behind the scenes here?
Man, players wise, I mean, the guys that we know well, kind of, we know what to expect from them. I do think it's going to be, because we'll be talking about it later, Najee is one of the funniest guys in the NFL, in my opinion. I want to see more of him. It's always fun. Jaylen Warren seems kind of fun too. Like those two, their dynamic together is going to be fun to watch. I want to know more about, obviously, like the rookies too. We're going to get to see more of what they're like, maybe than we would have seen otherwise without them being on Hard Knocks. Like obviously Roman Wilson, Peyton Wilson. Like how do those guys interact? Like how the bottom of the roster players, honestly, like how kind of the back of the 53. We never really get to hear much from them, right? Like we don't get to see much of those guys in general, like across the league. That's what really makes Hard Knocks usually fun. I know this is a little different because it's in season and not the off season stuff, but getting to hear more about those types of players opposed to just the stars will be definitely fun in general.
Yeah, Shayne, I actually carved out a little bit of time yesterday to write about some of the players that I want to see behind the scenes. And taking the cake, number 1 on my list is George Pickens, because
you're right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what to expect. Like we've seen the energy, we've seen the emotion from him. What is he like behind the scenes? How does he interact with his teammates? And I'm curious to see that dynamic as well. So definitely some interesting things to watch. If you're looking for more on this topic, we have some things up on the site, storylines to watch, under the radar storylines. I think it was Blaze that just wrote that for us. And so check that out on stillcurtain.com. All right, Shayne, let's talk about some of the roster moves the Steelers have made just today. They became official. One was announced yesterday, and that was the Steelers had waived wide receiver Denzel Mims. If the name sounds familiar, it's because Mims was a former 2nd-round pick by the New York Jets back in 2020. Had an amazing Senior Bowl performance. I still remember him just dominating everybody one-on-one, boxing players out with his 6'3", 207-pound frame. Shows up at the NFL Combine, runs a 4.38, tests out of the building. Well, what happened to this guy? I mean, he's fallen so far that he couldn't make it through his rookie contract with the Jets. The Steelers signed him to the practice squad in October, kind of sat with them, never played and never registered a snap in a game last year. And now the Steelers are moving on.
Yeah, he's one of those guys where, and there's countless guys who fall in this category, but I think big, tall, athletic receivers who just simply don't know how to separate at the NFL level, it's really hard to live in coverage, right? There's very few guys who have made that successful. One of those guys is on the team already with George Pickens, right? And I think Pickens has much more separation ability in him, and he's shown more of that, but he's one of those guys who does thrive in coverage. Like he can make plays with guys all over him. Mims, while he was really good at that in college and at the Senior Bowl, that's kind of what got him, to that status of a 2nd-round pick. A lot of those guys that play that way just don't really produce consistently, right? You can't target them often enough consistently to have them be a part of the offense. So that's ultimately what I think happened with him.
Yeah, and the consistency and overall play from Mims when he was on the Jets was just awful.
It just wasn't
like
wasn't
it was and so you can see why they had to turn the page. Like it just wasn't working. It makes you wonder, coming from like that Baylor offense, if it's
the Baylor guys
just
had trouble.
They take plays off and the ball doesn't come their way, and there's just like one design route, and so never got it, never caught on. I was not overly encouraged, because
No.
if you're not making it on the Jets with the way their talent situation was from 2020 to 2022, like, we know that there were big issues there. So I didn't think that he would ever become anything for the Steelers. But entering the NFL, I thought there was a chance he could do something with that size and frame there. Didn't catch on. He will look for another chance. He's still only 26 years old. He'll try to catch on with another team this summer before training camp. And the other move that was announced today, the Steelers waived safety Trenton Thompson. This one was more surprising for sure, because Thompson suited up for 6 games for Pittsburgh last year, 3 pass deflections, intercepted a pass, showed some promise. Like, I mean, he wasn't not a high profile player or anything coming out of San Diego State. What team didn't use a draft pick or anything on him. So it wasn't like we expected him to kindly suddenly make like a giant second-year leap. But I think a lot of fans had high expectations for him in year 2 based on what he showed last year. Maybe they thought he would carve out a rotational role. Turns out he won't be with the team this year.
Yeah, this one was definitely more surprising because I thought he played like a rosterable player last year. Beyond saying anything beyond that's probably being a little generous, but he played like somebody who deserved to be on a 53, right? Like
that's a good way to put
enough. Exactly. So the fact that he's not going to be in camp with us is interesting. Maybe it is as simple as, we did draft Ryan Watts in the 6th round this year. He's probably going to be playing safety, it seems like, instead of corner, which is probably a better fit for his build and his skill set. Maybe he's just been really impressive, and they felt like maybe Thompson wasn't going to make the roster no matter what, so let's let him go look for another opportunity or whatever. Maybe it comes down to that. But it was definitely much more surprising than the Mims release for sure.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, do they think that they have their safety group set already? Are they going to add a safety to replace him in camp, someone that maybe fits a different profile that they're looking for? It's hard to know for sure, because obviously you have to carry 90 players into the summer, and like you said, he's a rosterable player, like a guy that should be one of between 50 and 53 on your roster. Like, I think he's that guy that is good enough to stick around. So wouldn't have surprised me at all if he was cut right before the start of the season either.
Right.
But when you cut him this early, it is interesting. You got to wonder what the situation is here. Are the Steelers looking to add players at different positions possibly, and they thought that their depth was good enough at safety? I think all of a sudden now you've got 2 roster spots that are going to have to be filled now that you get rid of Mims and Thompson. And so I wonder where they're going to go with it. You have any predictions, Shayne, where they might go to look to fill these roles?
I could see them, although I think one of the reasons why Mims isn't on the roster is because they kind of have a ton of receivers, none of whom are necessarily great, except for maybe
and he doesn't play special teams at all.
Right, that hurts him the most, right? Is you can't really be on this roster right now as a receiver without playing special teams, unless you're going out and getting like a trade candidate like a Sutton or an Ayuk or something like that. So if they're still interested in that, maybe a move comes there in some way, trade-wise. And then as far as the other roster spot, I would love to see them add some more edge guys to this group prior to training camp. We talk about that all the time. Not expecting it, but I would love to see it. We kind of just always focus on having just the 2 main guys and a third. Love to bring in someone else to kind of be the 4th again, whether it's Marcus Golden or whoever it is, like we had last year. I'd love to see that, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. Edge depth is important. As good as TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith are, as promising as Nick Herbig looks early in his career, you've got to have more depth at the position.
Just give me a 4th. I don't need a 5th. Like a 5th would be great. Give me a 4th. Let's start there.
In 2022, Shayne, we've literally seen what happens when your star player, TJ Watt, goes on IR. Alex Highsmith couldn't do a thing without Watt out there. Neither could anybody on defense. Like, it was really rough. The splits without Watt are really, really rough. And so you'd like more depth there. Wide receiver is obviously the big one. That's the one everybody's been talking about. It's just the problem is if you're not getting an Ayuk or even a Cortland Sutton level player, then it's like, all right, is it anything? Are you going to get anything out there that's even worth adding to the roster? I mean, is anything going to be worth playing? Anybody worth playing over a Roman Wilson or a Calvin Austin? Like, I think that there's like no good medium in between those two. Like, you're either forking up for a big name, or you should just stick with what you have and kind of let the pieces fall where they may, because those guys are unproven and talented at least. So it'll be interesting to see what they do now that they have a few open spots. They can go a number of directions, defensive line depth potentially. So we'll see what they do there, or maybe fill that safety position back again. All right, we're going to move on to our next discussion topic. If you guys are joining us here in the live chat, you've got any questions for us, drop them in here. We'd love to get to those and see if we can answer them for you. Shayne, let's talk about Justin Fields here.
Did you want to talk about the Notre Dame trio of
Oh yeah,
Steelers
yeah.
players?
Let's talk about that real quick.
Okay.
If you've not seen so far, there's a
Yeah.
picture going around. It's gone viral now. The NFL has retweeted it. This came from Elijah Burris, which is the son of former Steelers wide receiver Plexico Burris.
Yep.
And in the sons of three former notable Steelers players, Plexico Burris, Ike Taylor, Jerome Bettis. All three of their sons have committed to Notre Dame in the class of 2025. And so they're all going to be playing for the Fighting Irish here. They'll all be draft eligible in 3-4 years from now. I think
it would be 2027 at the earliest.
Okay. So we don't know that sounds right off the top of my head. 2027, 28, something like that.
Something like that.
So it's interesting though, because what are the chances that all three of these former notable Steelers players have sons going to the same school at the same time? They're all at least 3-star recruits. Ivan Taylor, Ike's son, is a 4-star recruit. And so in playing similar positions now, Jerome Bettis Jr. is a wide receiver, obviously not a running back. And then Ivan's going to be a safety and not a cornerback, but kind of in the same wheelhouse there. The Steelers love strong family bloodlines. They love connections. I went back and looked at it today to get the exact number, but in the spring of 2022, after the 2022 draft, the Steelers had 3 sets of brothers on their roster, on their 90-man roster, all at the same time. Cam and Connor Hayward, TJ and Derek Watt, Trey and Terrell Edmonds. They obviously drafted Joey Porter Jr. They admitted that they would have taken Porter in the first round of the 2023 NFL draft had they not made the move up for Broderick Jones. They can see what's happening around the league. You've got like Patrick Surtains, Asante Samuel Jr., Antoine Winfield Jr. And so these guys are turning out, and I don't know what
generally works out.
When you live and breathe football your entire life, and your dad was a good NFL player, for the most part, if you possess the profile and the athletic traits, it seems like you end up being a pretty solid football player. We have Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. The Steelers would have never been able to touch because he went so early in the draft.
Right.
But it makes you wonder, like, are the Steelers going to have their eyes on these guys here in a couple of years?
I mean, like historical precedent says, yes, if they're good enough players to make it to the NFL, and obviously we won't know that for a while. Who knows if they stick on Notre Dame for too long, especially with the rules in college now, they could spread out, do whatever. But yeah, if they are legit NFL prospects, I'm going to be willing to bet that they will be on the radar of the Steelers. Now, obviously, Omar Khan, we don't know how much he believes in that. He did obviously draft Porter Jr., but also was a first-round caliber player, so you can't really argue with him for wanting to do that. But in general, I do think the Steelers like that type of stuff. With Tomlin sticking around for quite some time still as well, I'm sure he subscribes to that idea too. And at this point, like you said, like it kind of feels like it's a good bet. Like it seems like it work out more often than not. So I'm kind of with it as long as I think the player's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine a roster like 5 years from now that has Joey Porter Jr., Jerome Bettis Jr., Ivan Taylor, Plexico's son? Like it's interesting to think about, and it makes me feel so old that all these kids are being drafted now.
Tough.
So like that was like my heyday growing up was obviously the early 2000s Steelers, those Super Bowl teams, and now watching their sons soon to join the NFL. Porter already has, some others already have around the league. And so that'll be interesting, just something to monitor. And if you're interested at all in that, keep an eye on the Fighting Irish this year, see if those guys get some play time, and we'll kind of keep tabs on them over the next couple of years here, as I'm sure that'll be a story that everyone is pretty interested in. All right, Shane, now we will move on to Justin Fields. And like I said, if you have any questions for us, please drop them in the chat over here, and we'll see if we can get to those for you. Not exactly rave reviews by the Steelers' young quarterback. Justin Fields was obviously brought over after Russell Wilson signed for the veteran minimum this year. Fans were hopeful that maybe Fields could be a guy who beats out Russell Wilson for the job. Now, based on the comments that we've heard in apparently what was said behind closed doors, that doesn't look like it's happening, at least to start the season, Shane. But we need to see signs that at least can point us in the direction to say, yeah, Fields deserves a look over Russell Wilson. And unfortunately, at least from what these beat reporters have said, we've not been seeing that so far. Now, I haven't been there, obviously, behind in the facility, seeing these guys in OTAs and mini camps. But I want to read a couple of quotes from the things that they've said here. And we'll start with one from Ray Fittipaldo. Fields, from what I've seen, they had a month of spring practices, and he's a terrific athlete. But really, the knock against him is that I heard coming out actually turned to be true. He is not terribly accurate with the ball. His placement isn't great, and I can see him maybe having a package or two for him each week, depending on the opponent. But I see I see this team as Russell Wilson's team, and so not exactly a glowing endorsement by Phil DePaulo. Mark Caboli of the Athletic had to say, Wilson did nothing through 12 practices to even slightly indicate that he could lose the starting quarterback competition to Justin Fields. The work ethic, experience, arm talent, and the fact that he basically took all of the first team snaps strongly suggests that nothing Wilson can do between July 24th and September 8th, that's the start of training camp and the start of the year, would prevent him from starting. And then Brian Batko, another beat reporter, said, we've also heard positives on Fields out of Chicago, so I'm not too concerned about some of the negatives. As I said earlier, I'm not going to put too much stock into OTAs and minicamp work, but I do see a guy who needs to get more comfortable reading NFL defenses and improve as a passer. And kind of the underlying theme here, Shayne, that everybody is agreeing on, that has been watching these guys in practice, is Fields has some accuracy issues that need to be cleaned up. Like, where do you go from here? You're entering the 4th year of your NFL career. How do you work on these things at this time?
So I want to start by saying that in general, like what they're saying lines up with what you expect from Fields so far in his career. So this should not really be a surprise to anyone. I don't think it is for most people who have spent a lot of time watching him over the past 4 years, right? I think for me, I'm still kind of on the side of where Batko's at, where it's like, this is OTAs, this is not like games, this is not training camp. There's a difference in what they're doing here versus what they're going to be doing in camp and in the preseason and once the season starts. But I will say with Fields, the thing that I've always felt with him is if you go back to his college career, statistically, and even if you look at like on target percentage and stuff like that, if you follow that type of stuff, people who track that stuff, he's one of the most accurate college quarterbacks we've ever seen. Like that was just the truth of the matter when he was in college. However, there is a bit of a difference between just getting the ball where it kind of needs to be and being a precision passer. Fields is not a precise passer. He's not one of those guys that is going to just sit back there and dissect defenses and get the ball exactly where it needs to go on time, in rhythm. That's just not his game. He is very much more of a playmaker as a thrower, right? Where he's going to try to get the ball out to space where his guys can just kind of run under it and make plays on the ball. He's not trying to be that type of precision passer. And I don't think he's ever going to be that type of passer. But what he can do, and the thing that he always has been great at, and this is why, like for him, I think there's more upside with him, especially because of the athleticism, is his ability to put the ball down the field and give his receivers a chance is his best attribute. Attacking down the field when he can cleanly see a throw, that's when he can make precise passes, is down the field. Obviously, where does Russell Wilson do really well? Throwing the moon balls down the field. So if he's competing with Wilson in that regard, those two are going to probably at worst even up with each other, right? Like they're going to be similar levels of deep passers. Where Fields isn't going to be quite as good is the preciseness, again, the precision with his passes. Now, Wilson also has trouble in certain areas, like throwing over the field, like Fields does too. Like both of them have struggles there. But Wilson has way more experience as a passer, right? He has way more experience as a quarterback in the NFL. He's going to look better in these practice scenarios than Fields. What the Steelers have to ask themselves is, does Fields eventually, whether it's early in the season, whether it's later, does his ability as a playmaker supersede the precision that maybe Wilson can give you in the short to intermediate game? That's where you have to decide, like, is it worth switching the quarterbacks if it's not working very well with Wilson, right? I don't think we're going to see that happen, though, until they get on the field in real games. That's the only time I think Wilson really has to truly worry about his job being taken.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about that. Like, if the Steelers are winning football games, even if it's like 13-10, like they're not going to make that change. We've just seen it too often in the past where they're not willing to pull the trigger on something like that if they're having success in their mind, even if it's not equating to a great offense. But you hit it right on the head when you talk about Fields' accuracy, and I like to phrase it as general accuracy. Like there's a radius where he will get the ball. It's not like Peyton Manning. He's not going to put the ball in perfect stride to his wide receiver. And so, I mean, obviously he's going to do that from time to time. He's just in general, he is generally accurate. And so that's just something that I don't know. Can you clean it up at this stage of his career? And going back to his Ohio State days, though, Shayne, I always wondered, like, with that offense, like, did things just come so easy? Now, obviously, CJ Stroud is very accurate, and he's had an awesome start to his career. But Dwayne Haskins was there, and there were other quarterbacks before him in that Ohio State offense. where the receivers are just so like otherworldly talented, and the offense was so well drawn up that it seemed like guys were just running open all the time. And so I wonder if that was part of it as well, and how they kind of equated those accuracy statistics.
Yeah.
But I think that
Yeah.
for sure it's something that needs to be improved, obviously. And so how do they go about doing this? Like, I think that for one thing, Shayne, I think that you need to, we talked about accuracy is the issue. I think this is where Tom Arth steps in, right? You get a young quarterback coach who was over with Justin Herbert and the Chargers before this. What can he do with this moldable ball of clay here? Because I think Fields is far from a finished product. I mean, you've got a 6'3", almost 230-pound quarterback who can move as well as anybody at the position in the game. Got a cannon arm, but can you clean up the things where it matters most? Can you be a refined pocket passer? Can you clean up your throwing mechanics? I think that his throwing mechanics attribute to his inconsistent accuracy. He's got the elbow that comes way out when he throws. And so that's part of it too. Like, are you too far along in the process playing quarterback, for being listed as like the best dual threat quarterback coming out of high school, playing all the way until now, entering your fourth year in the NFL? Is he too far gone to be coached into some of these tips? Like, I'm interested to see how much work can they do to fix some of these things.
I think it's really interesting because he's had to play obviously since his rookie season partway through. And I think the bad habits he's developed as a passer and as a pocket specifically passer are things that, because he had to keep going out there and being the guy, he wasn't able to just rep them and focus on doing that. He had to go out there and actually make plays and try to win games. And I think if he does truly end up as a backup for us this year, and again, maybe we bring him back next year on an extension, but maybe he still doesn't start, or maybe whatever, I do think he needs time to just be a quarterback in practice and rep these things that they're going to be teaching him. Because again, when the bullets are flying, you're going to revert to what you know. Like, he's not going to be able to, at least in my opinion, a lot of guys can, some guys can't. Fields has not really been able to develop as a passer while trying to go out there and just survive with the Bears, right? And again, that's partially on him, it's partially on the Bears, but that's just kind of the reality of it. I don't think you can improve the things he needs to improve by just being forced to go out there every week and try to make it happen. Now that he is going to get a chance to probably sit, whether it's the full year, whether it's half year, whatever, this is a chance where we could see him start to improve upon those things. And again, is it guaranteed? No. Is it even likely? Probably not. But I do think one of the key things that has to get better with him, and one of the quotes talked about this, is he needs to be more comfortable reading defenses, because when he does see a throw, that's when the accuracy is most consistent. Is when he sees it, he trusts it, and he lets it rip. That's why the deep shots that are kind of schemed up for him, where he knows exactly where the ball is supposed to go, those are his most accurate passes. That's usually not the case, right? The farther you throw down the field, the usually less accurate you are in general, right? Fields is kind of the opposite right now, where he is most comfortable and most confident and most accurate once the ball's flying down the field 30 yards. So if he can start to get more of that confidence on the middle of the field throws and the short throws and just the timing element of things, that's when his accuracy could start to resemble more what it looked like at Ohio State when guys were running wide open. He was comfortable throwing the ball, right? That was the reason why he was more accurate in college, right? Because those guys were always giving him easy looks to throw to. So.
Yeah, and Shayne, there's such a fine line too, because as much as I love the talent and upside of a player like Justin Fields, at some point, like, that curve flattens out, and it's like, now, okay, you're in year 4. Like, if the Steelers were getting Justin Fields in year 2, I'm like, oh man, we just got a franchise quarterback.
It is,
but now the further you move along into your NFL career, and the longer it takes for you to get it, then I feel like at some point where is that line? Like, is it this year? Is it next year? Like, I think that it's somewhere right in there. Like, a lot of times you can tell by year 2, like, oh, we've got a franchise quarterback. A lot of times it doesn't take that long. Like CJ Stroud, franchise quarterback, couple games in his career, he's a franchise quarterback. Now, Jordan Love, obviously longer, because he was sitting and learning behind Aaron Rodgers. But I think that this situation is a little bit different. He's on his second team. So this is second team, second chance type of thing. Still just 25 years old. But at some point, we're going to give up hope, and we're going to say, all right, 4 years into your career, 5 years into your career, we've seen enough. You're not it. And I don't want that to be the case, but I would be more optimistic that he could be a franchise guy if he was a little bit earlier on, and we've seen a little bit more of an uphill trajectory instead of just a slight trajectory since coming into the league.
I will say, and I'm not trying to compare this situation to the one I'm going to talk about. I'm not saying that this is going to happen. But we've seen a couple examples in the past half decade of quarterbacks who either played a lot and didn't really show up, and then all of a sudden on a new team they figured it out, or a guy who had to go and wait his turn and learn and develop and everything like that. Ryan Tannehill and Geno Smith were entirely different quarterbacks several years longer into their career than Justin Fields currently is, right? And again, those guys are still anomalies, right? That doesn't happen a ton. You don't see a lot of late career breakouts. But Geno Smith is a $100 million man as a Seahawk in his 30s. Ryan Tannehill got a nice contract from the Titans for what he did. Now, granted, that level play didn't quite stick around very long, but it's still much better than his previous level play with Miami. This stuff can happen. And I think both of those guys, for different reasons, needed that time. They needed that time as backups. They needed that time in a new system to get to where they ultimately got. And I think, is this system the best one for him to do that? Maybe not. And that's kind of part of the issue, is I don't think this is a great system fit for either of our primary quarterbacks we may have this year. But still, like, just being a backup, and I think having the opportunity to just focus on how can I get better as a player, not having the pressure of you got to go out there and make this offense work, because if you can't do it, it's not going to work. That's what the Bears have been with him, right? Like, if he can't make a play, if he can't get a 30-yard run on 3rd and 18, if he can't throw a deep ball on 3rd and 20 whenever he's gotten sacked twice in a row, like, that was what he was doing the past half decade, basically, now almost. He doesn't have to do that here. Even if he has to play, he's not going to have to do that here. They're not going to ask him to carry this offense. They're not going to ask any quarterback to carry this offense. It's just a very different situation. I think people should be optimistic if he gets a chance to play because of the surrounding cast, but also they should be patient with what he could be, especially if they are able to retain him past this year.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes the change of scenery is all it takes. It's as simple as that. And for what it's worth, Shayne, he's still younger than Kenny Pickett, who has only played 2 years in the NFL.
Yes.
So take that for what it is. Do you have any chats that you wanted to get to here?
There was one just kind of talking about with Fields. Like, Fields has many issues. His biggest is game speed processing. Again, it is an anomaly when a quarterback maxes the one-look test. The one-look test is just kind of whatever. I think his issues are baked into his quarterback cake. I think that there are certain things about him that may never truly improve, at least not to the level you would like them to be. Again, this is a quarterback that, from just a talent perspective, is in the top half of the league talent-wise. There's no real debate about that, in my opinion. But again, at some point, talent has to show up on the field and has to show up in the results. And outside of a game here and a game there, it just hasn't been there, right? And it hasn't put it all together. I think there's more of a chance that he can do that if he has to play for us this year than he's ever had a chance to do it. But I'd still probably prefer him to get most of, if not the full season, to just kind of settle down and fix some of the stuff he's had issues with.
Yeah, for sure. And on the encouraging note here, because I want to leave it optimistic, because I've always been optimistic about Fields. He was my number 2 overall player in the 2021 NFL draft, right behind Trevor Lawrence. And so I liked him a lot coming out. I don't want to give up hope yet. At some point, that curve is going to level off and he's going to be what he's going to be, unless you're Geno Smith and you break out at like 30 years old.
Right.
But the one thing that I would note, though, here is things have gone up over the last 3 years, even if it's slightly. Like, completion percentage went from 58.9 to 60.4 to 61.4. So like 8 years from now, he's going to be a great quarterback.
Right. Exactly. If you track that.
But like 20 total touchdowns last year, 9 interceptions in 13 games, rushed for over 400 yards. So obviously we know what he can do chipping in with his legs. And then you look at like the downfield passing metrics and efficiency. He was like 11th through 15th, if I recall, in most of those categories. And so there are some things to be optimistic about for sure. And I think it's just the total package, like the athletic traits and everything that you're getting from him is what inspires the most optimism. That and the fact that he's like 10 and a half years younger than Russell Wilson. And so that's why you and I have been saying, like, we hope that he's the guy that wins the job out, because there's hope for a future if Justin Fields is the guy. There's hope for a present if Russell Wilson is the guy.
Right. That's the difference. And I think in general, like, you obviously want the future to be brighter than the current day team. And that's kind of just not how the Steelers work in general. As we kind of know that. It's one of my biggest gripes with the team. Bringing Fields does give me a little bit of hope. They're trying to move in that way. Also drafting a lot of young players who need to develop but are very talented. That also helps. But yeah, I mean, the best thing for the future of the team would be for Fields to start and work out. If he starts and doesn't work out, then you kind of just wasted a year anyway, and it doesn't really matter that much who started, right? So that's the big gripe there. It's like, all right, well, it has potential downside. It's like, yeah, but is Wilson going to play well enough to earn a starting job past this year here? I don't think so, personally. So who cares, right? That's kind of my opinion, but whatever.
Well, and to raise kind of an opposite point here, last year, Kenny Pickett was the star of the offseason, the star of the preseason, did nothing in the regular season. So maybe the opposite trajectory will happen with Fields, where he'll kind of just show everybody up. But you never know. I mean, the offseason, it's a crapshoot. You never know, really. How much can you glean from practice?
I was at that Bills preseason game. I would have told you we were going to the Super Bowl if I just watched that one. So there you go. That's all.
Yeah, perfect pass rating in the preseason, 158.3.
Perfect pass rating.
Did not translate to the regular season, obviously, for Pickett, and he was traded to the Eagles. All right, anything else you want to say on Justin Fields before we move on here, Shayne?
No, just that I hope that he does get a chance to fix whatever issues he does have, and maybe we see him in spurts this year, or maybe back half of the year. If we do have finally an under 500 season, maybe we see Fields at the end of the year just to close things out. So we'll see.
Yeah, and Shayne, you talk about the 500 season. I want to say this real quick because I just wrote an article. You can check it out on stillcurtain.com. I did 10 simulations with Sportskeeda's NFL playoff predictor. And
I saw this. Yeah,
the stats were so bad for what they're projecting the Steelers, like as low as 4 and 13. They had one season where they had above 8 wins in their playoff calculator. And so their average record of the 10 simulations I ran, 6.8 and 10.2 was their average record. So I wouldn't put a lot of weight into that. We know the Steelers a lot better than that. But it is interesting. I mean, with how tough their schedule is, with how much roster turnover they've had, could this be the year where that streak finally snaps, that 2-decade-long streak of never having that losing record. So obviously that's going to be a big topic of discussion throughout the season. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. Shayne and I love doing this. We love bringing you at least one show each week. And Josh Yorsh is also bringing you a show live on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. We're live on Wednesdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. All right, Shayne, let's talk about Najee Harris for a minute here. He's been in the news a lot, kind of like Cam Hayward. We don't know what his future holds with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Obviously, the news peaked with Najee back in May 2nd, when the Steelers let the 5th-year option pass and nothing happened. And so they elected to decline the 5th-year option, which was only $6.79 million, according to Over the Cap, to keep Najee Harris around for the 2025 season. Now, Omar Khan recently had an interview with 93.7 The Fan, where he described this as a business decision by the Steelers, but then went on to speak wonders about Harris's character. Said, we love having him around. Just essentially, we love having him in the facility. We love having him a part of the team. I don't know what else he's going to say in that situation. If he was very straightforward, Shayne, and if he was being honest, would he say something like, yeah, we're thinking about moving in another direction? Obviously no GM is going to come out and say that. But is that where the Steelers are thinking with this? Because why else would you decline the option at a very reasonable price, which is, again, I've got numbers right here. I can look at where that ranks. Let me look at, I'm on Over the Cap right now, looking at running backs. Obviously the top running backs are making a lot of money. McCaffrey's making $19 million per year now in average, but you can dig down the list and that puts them like the 6.79 would put him just above Miles Sanders and David Montgomery in terms of average annual earnings. And so is Najee in that mold? For sure. With Sanders, Montgomery was good with the Lions, but I think I think that he's probably in that mold. So you could argue for sure that the price was right. I mean, that's money that it's guaranteed. It can't be moved around, but the cap hit's not all that big. And so it makes you wonder what the decision was here. So Shayne, I want to ask a question to you then. How much is Najee worth? And I want to give you some other figures here of what running backs are making around the league. And obviously inflation will bump things up a little bit next year, but that could have even been factored in. Like as more running backs get paid, that $6.79 million would probably look even a little bit better. So Tony Pollard making $7.25 million, Aaron Jones $7 million per year, James Conner $7 million per year. Just above that pay grade is DeAndre Swift at $8 million per. 30-year-old Derrick Henry, who's still a good football player, at $8 million per season. And then we jump up a level above that. Joe Mixon, $9.875 million per year. And then it jumps up to Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley at 12 plus per year. And a few other running backs above that. Based on the names that I just said and the numbers, if we're strictly looking at this from like an average annual earnings standpoint, Shayne, where should Najee fall in line with these players here? Should it be below all the names I mentioned? Should it be somewhere in the middle?
I think if I was content with like having him as my starting running back, if I wanted him on the team as a starting running back, I think the deal that Swift just got from the Bears is about what it probably should be, where Swifty was very productive with the Eagles, but we kind of know that was the Eagles more so than Swift. His vision is very poor. He has some flaws to his game, but when he has a chance, when there's an open lane, he can make good on it, right? Najee's a different type of player, but I think, again, he's a flawed but very useful player, one that is very durable, who's very consistent. He closes games well. He plays better in the second half of the year typically, which is really nice for a team that is in playoff contention because you want to play your best at that point. All those things point to a guy that's probably worth around that $7 to $8 million range as a running back for 3 years at most, probably, right? I think when he called it a business decision with Omar Khan, I think where this comes from, and I've talked about this in the past, and you and I have both spoken on this scheme is not an ideal fit for his running style. So if they want to run the true like outside zone Arthur Smith running game that they've been running, this is not the best type of running back for that skill set. Now, I'm not saying he can't improve it. He's already dropped weight. It looks like he's looking to get quicker, faster. Maybe he is going to be able to adjust to become a really good runner in that type of system. But I think Omar Khan wants to see that before he pays him any more money than he has to. I think he wants to see what type of player Najee can be in the system, because Arthur Smith is obviously who they want to be this coordinator for several years. You're not going to extend a running back or pay him any amount of money if he's not going to be a fit for the team, right? That's ultimately what I think it comes down to. That's where the business decision part, I think, comes in. Again, if he can be the player that I think he can be or has been in this offense instead of the one that he's used to, then he's still worth around that, like I said, that Swiftish level contract. If he can't adjust and if he can't run well in the system, then he's probably better off on another team. And that's probably why you decline a fifth-year option. He can go somewhere else if it's not a fit anymore. You don't have to pay him, guaranteed almost $7 million to maybe not even be the starting running back anymore.
Yeah, and I think that makes total sense. Why you would do that? You obviously want to see how he's going to fit in here. Is he going to be worse in this wide zone scheme than he's been in his first 3 years in the gap? And so it makes you wonder if these played a factor, and we can assume that they probably did. The question becomes, Shayne, like, we be looking at this a year from now, and if the Steelers were to give Najee an extension, and it's like you said, somewhere in the 8-ish million per year range, well, now you're tying yourselves to a running back with a bunch of wear and tear. You're paying him more than you would have paid on the 5th-year option. Like, fans will look back in this and say, Con, you made a foolish decision not just inking him to the 5th-year option, because theoretically
there is downside
that will
potential.
take him.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many studies that have been done on running back shelf life, and that number is like 27 years old. That's what Najee is going to be next year. And so you would have had him under contract for that age 27 season. And my goodness, he's going to have more carries in the first 4 years of his career than any running back in the league. If he stays healthy again one more season, he's played every single game since he's been in the league, and he's been a workhorse back. And so I don't think anybody will surpass him in terms of carries in that 4-year span if he stays healthy again for another season. That's a lot of usage. 834 carries, I think, off the top of my head, is how many Najee's had in his first 3 seasons. I saw a stat just floating out there today from Pro Football Focus. Travis Etienne has had more forced missed tackles than Najee Harris has, and missed his entire rookie season.
Yeah.
So he's played almost half as many snaps as Harris, but is obviously more efficient in a lot of areas.
Very, very different players. Yeah.
And that all goes back to that argument of, if the Steelers were dead set on taking running back in 2021, did they take the wrong guy? Should you have taken Etienne, a much more explosive guy, home run hitter, who can take the ball the distance once you get out in space? Like, Najee's not fast to begin with. You and I know that that's not his specialty. He's good at other things. But when you look at him beyond the 2025 season, because again, we're talking about a multi-year deal here. There's no reason for that Najee is going to want to sign a 1-year contract that would essentially be a 5th-year option. If he hits the open market, he's going to want to sign and get guaranteed money and sign a multi-year deal so that he's taken care of there. There's no reason that he is going to want to come back to the Steelers unless they pay him more than that. But it is an interesting decision. If you have any inkling of interest at all in actually bringing him back, my prediction here, Shayne, let's first talk about this. Should the Steelers extend Najee Harris? Then we'll get to that in the last thing that we do before we sign off here today. Should the Steelers sign Najee? Now, we're jumping the gun a little bit here because we haven't seen him in Arthur Smith's offense. But based on what you've seen from Najee the first 3 years, knowing that he is probably one of those leaders on the team, he is extremely durable. It's played as much as any running back over the last 3 seasons. But also knowing the mileage that's on him right now, and projecting forward, and just ignoring the Arthur Smith connection here for a second and saying, can you make this work in a wide zone? Do you think that he's going to be a guy that's going to be worth signing to, let's call it a 3-year extension, because that's probably what he's going to be aiming for? Obviously, it's not going to be fully guaranteed. He'll probably have guarantees in the first year because he is a running back. One that will probably be splitting time with Jaylen Warren. So guarantees in the first year, knowing how the Steelers do this, they'll backload the contract, structure things in a way that after the second season, you can get out of that, get out of that 3rd year at very little cost to the team. Would you be open to doing something like that? Like, should the Steelers sign him to an extension like that following the season? And let's assume that the trajectory kind of stays the same that it's been these last couple of years.
If it stays the same, then yes, because I think you also extend Warren, you pair those two together, they play off each other very well. Warren gets to have the defenses be beat up by Najee. Najee gets to wear them down. Warren comes in, breaks off big plays. Warren stays fresh. Najee can handle the punishment. It is a symbiotic relationship with those two right now. I really believe that. I know people keep saying about, like, well, who should be the starters? Like, I don't really care. Like, I don't think it matters. I think Najee should get more carries because he can handle them and is productive enough with them, and allows Warren to create explosives for an offense that simply doesn't create them otherwise. Like, I think people forget about that. Like, I saw a tweet last week, or I think it was earlier this week, about, every running back who averages like 6 yards a carry on 100 carries, as soon as you give them 200 carries, now they're averaging 4 yards because they have more opportunities to mess up. They have more opportunities to get a bad block. They have more, like, it's just natural. When you get more carries, you generally lose efficiency because you're more opportunities for a bad play or a negative play. Allowing Warren to continue to be that 100 to 150 carry, 50 catch guy is way more effective for the offense and way more efficient than asking him to become Najee Harris, right? That's just not who he probably should be. Sure, he could be very productive with 200 carries. I'm not saying he wouldn't be at all, but it saves him from having to prove that. You don't have to give him all those touches. He can remain effective because he also was an older rookie, right? Like, he had a ton of college production. Like, allowing these guys to not kill themselves, if you can get away with it, is the best way to have a consistent running game for years, right? Where you know what you're getting out of these guys, you know how they work. Having them together is more valuable than having one or the other, in my opinion. So if he can continue to play at the level he's played at, or even better, hopefully, he absolutely deserves an extension. Will it be anything lucrative? Probably not, because, again, he's not this hyper-efficient, explosive back. He's definitely more of a grinder. Those guys don't get paid $10, $11, $12 million. So I think it'd be well worth it, especially with a team that doesn't spend much money on offense right now anyway.
Yeah, Shayne, first of all, I want to say that I think the running back by committee approach is the right approach.
Yes,
like, unless
absolutely.
you stumble upon a Derrick Henry or a Christian McCaffrey,
right,
who's just so dynamic as a receiver. And so you need one of those special type players in order to really say, all right, this is my guy for the foreseeable future. If not, you probably should have a committee approach because, like you said, there's no doubt in my mind that if Najee wasn't there, taking some of the weight off of Warren's shoulders, that Warren wouldn't be as efficient. But I do think that Warren is an incredible running back because of what he's allowed to do and how he works. Now, having said that, Shayne, my approach, I think, would be different than yours. Instead of, because what it comes down to for me is I don't want to pay 2 running backs. I just don't think it's the best use of cap space financially. And so I know that you can do it, but you look ahead at all the players the Steelers have to get done. My goodness. Cameron Hayward and Dante Jackson's a free agent. James Daniels is a free agent. Both of your quarterbacks, Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, are free agents. Pat Fryermuth's a free agent. Many others. You got dozens of guys set to become unrestricted free agents next year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. can you afford to pay 2 running backs? And I would look at it, I'd say no. I would look at the history of successful teams in the playoffs, and specifically the ones that have made it to the Super Bowl. Other than Christian McCaffrey, it's been teams that have not forked up for running backs. And so if I'm paying one, and Shayne, this is my personal opinion, and you're welcome to disagree if you like, I would pay Jaylen Warren because he has.
If I had to pay one of them only, probably
less than half as many touches. He's more visibly more explosive than Najee. Still excellent contact balance, can bounce off tackles without losing speed. He's the more efficient player as the receiving back. And so, and I think he's got more left in the tank, quite frankly. He's younger with way less tread off the tires. So if I can get a few more years of Jaylen Warren, I'd rather have that than the later stages of Najee, where his efficiency might already start to dip down by the 2025 season. And so that would be my preference. Also, Shayne, I kind of feel like, now this is not to be, I hate using this word. I don't want to call Najee a plotter, but I think in some ways that's what Warren needs, is that plotting running back who can do a lot of the dirty work and the damage in between the tackles, so that he doesn't have to be a workhorse back, so that he can remain very efficient. I would prefer to go either and get a guy in free agency, or to go out and spend like a 4th-ish round pick on a 5'11", 6 foot, 220-pound back who can do some of those things, who's a really physical player. You can't get away with a Benny Snell, but you need somebody that can kind of carry that load, 10, 12 touches, and take some of that stuff off his shoulders a little bit. But I don't necessarily think that guy has to be Najee. Like, I don't think that Najee
has to be. No, I don't think so.
No, and I would kind of just point to the efficiency numbers, honestly. And obviously, he did have like the explosive touches last year. Now his runs were barely over 20 yards, but he did meet that 20-yard threshold. So he did get there, which is something that Bell didn't do in his last season with the Steelers, when he carried the ball 321 times at a terrible 20-yard play rate. But I think it's just barely getting there, and it's usually when the situation is pretty well blocked. I think that Najee's job can be replaced a lot more easily than Warren's, because Warren is more dynamic. That's my opinion on the matter. And again, it comes down to finances for me. I'd like to keep both of them here because I think that they are a very good pairing together. Obviously, barring how both of these guys look in Arthur Smith's offense, but finances, looking ahead at what guys need to be signed next year, I just don't think that if the contract
price matters, the price matters a ton. How much is it going to cost to actually keep them both? That's really what it comes down to.
And if we are looking at that 8-ish mil per year range for a Najee Harris, I would turn the page. That would be my personal decision. I'd use that money to keep Warren and then sign a back that you can pair with him that would be a good fit. Now, the last question that I want to get to before we sign off today here, Shayne, is will Najee be on the Steelers in 2025? We gave our thoughts on what the Steelers should do, but will he be on there? What is our prediction? Do you think that he will be with the Pittsburgh Steelers beyond this season, knowing that he is an unrestricted free agent in 2025?
Yeah, I don't. I don't think he will. I think it's twofold, and we've talked about it a lot, but I don't think, even with a slimmed down version of him, unless it's much, like he has to look much different as a player. Not just because, again, the effectiveness is one thing, but the style is more important here in this conversation. He cannot play the way he has at his size that he's played at in this offense and expect to be effective, unless they're going to run a lot more of the stuff that they've run in the past. Like, Smith is not going to like what Najee has done and put on film in the past. I don't think so personally. So he has to reinvent himself as a player. Now, if he can do that and he isn't going to cost a massive amount, I could definitely see him coming back on, like, either if he's willing to play on a 1-year deal, preferably, or like a small extension, whatever, that's possible. But I think, again, like, it all comes back. There's a reason why his 5th-year option wasn't picked up. It's because Khan and I think the coaching staff is not 100% sure that his style is a fit for where they're going offensively. And if he's not, there's no reason to guarantee him almost $7 million. Now, something else we didn't really talk about, because we're very early in this, college season hasn't even started yet. This is a pretty fantastic running back class coming up. And you might be able to get a guy who can replace both of these guys we have currently, their skill sets, in the 2nd, 3rd round. And maybe you don't want to spend that high of a pick on a running back, but some of these guys are very, very dynamic players. And if they're looking ahead at that and going, man, maybe we can find the perfect Arthur Smith running back in the draft next year, another reason not to pay him money that you might not even want to, well, for a guy you might not even be playing much in 2025. So my guess right now is I probably would say he's not on the team in 2025.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, Shayne. It's only doing your due diligence as a scouting department, as a team in a front office to look ahead and say, what's going to be there next year? How deep is this running back class? Can we get a guy that can replace that skill set? I think those are all factors that a lot of people don't think about. It's like, oh, you're thinking that far into the future. Well, I mean, you got to plan for what's next. If you're not going to get the option, like maybe that factors into it. So, but I agree with you, Shayne. I think that this is Najee's last year in Pittsburgh. And for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think the Steelers are not oblivious to the fact that Jaylen Warren has been vastly the more efficient running back over the past 2 seasons. Now, I'm not saying that he deserves to have every touch taken away from Najee.
That's not how it works with them now. But
we agreed that they work well as a tandem. It's like the aging Fred Taylor with the younger Jones Drew, the one punch type of thing. Like
Thomas Jones, Jamal Charles, that one year.
Thomas Jones, Thomas Jones,
fun one.
So it's one of those things where I do think their skill sets work well together, but because of the finances, because of the direction it's heading, and knowing that 2 running backs need contracts, not one guy, you can say, all right, I think, Shayne, the primary reason they passed on giving Najee the 5th-year option at just $6.79 million is he's not going to be part of the future plans. I think I genuinely think that unless he shows to be awesome in this wide zone, looks like he's got a lot left in the tank, then maybe it comes down to a decision between a Harris and a Warren. I have a hard time seeing them paying both because I just honestly, Shayne, and I think that Andy Weidl and Omar Khan are too smart for that. Like, I think they're too smart to fall into the trap of paying multiple running backs when you have, especially when you have so many other guys that need contracts. And so I think that would be my approach to it, at least. And I think that's kind of how the Steelers are approaching it. And again, you talked about the fit. What Najee's going to need to prove that he can move very well east to west before cutting up north and south. That's what you have to be able to do as a wide zone runner. And I just don't think that's his game. Like, I don't think he's got that type of speed and quickness
for sure. Yeah.
So, and we'll see if he can make that adjustment. It's a big adjustment going from what he's done in the past to this. So that would be my guess. If you guys have any other guesses, please drop them in the chat here as what you think the Steelers are going to do with Najee. You can chime in with your thoughts on what the Steelers, what you think is going to happen with Justin Fields here this year. Shayne, is there any other chats or comments you want to get to before we sign off here for today?
We've got a bunch from John here, just in general about running backs and Harris's comments about. Actually, let me put this one up first. I think Harris making comments into the press last year about the Steelers' culture and work ethic was heard, not forgotten. That's fair. And then with Harris, the Harris juice can be replaced with a draft squeeze. That's a good one. In general, again, running backs are the most replaceable position in the NFL, in my opinion. Linebacker and safety are up there too at this point. However, again, I think for teams that want to play the style the Steelers are going towards, if Harris can be a fit for this offense, I think that it's not impossible that they decide to bring him and Warren back if they both prove to be good fits. It's just, again, based on what they've already done and what he's looked like in the past, it just doesn't seem like a probably good fit for really either side. Like, Harris probably would be in a better situation to go to a team that just wants to pound the football and doesn't want to have to do the wide zone stuff. The amount of teams that don't run wide zone are shrinking, it seems like, every year, but there's roles for those guys. They exist. So that might be what's best for both sides ultimately.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that there will be a market for Najee Harris, former first-round pick. Obviously, he's got a reputation, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons to begin his career. Somebody's going to want him, whether it looks like there's juice left in the tank or not.
We've seen
based on the reputation alone, like we know. We know how that works, and so he's going to sign for a respectable contract somewhere, barring some major injury. But I agree, Shayne. I don't think that it's with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that's going to be elsewhere, and I think the Steelers turn the page. And it looks like, I mean, another factor you can kind of point to here, right? One last comment before we sign off. It does look like Andy Weidl and Omar Khan are kind of just turning the page on all of these, all these late Kevin Colbert draft picks. Like, they want their guys in there, and it's not uncommon to see this from front offices. And so it looks like they're kind of waving goodbye to a lot of these Colbert picks and ushering in the new era with their own guys and their selections, the guys that they feel fit the direction of their team. So that could factor in as well. All right. Thanks, John, for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us here on the live chat. Once again, we go live on YouTube every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. You can also check out Josh's show at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. Thank you all for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.